The Too Tall Sports podcast is brought to you by no one. Not yet, at least. We're looking for sponsors, always. Today's episode, I have one of my colleagues, Bernie Holliday. He's the director of mental strength. He's a sports psychologist for the Pittsburgh Pirates organization. I worked with him back in 2010, 2011 when I was there. And we go through, he's got a great story, his background with the military and then transitioning to baseball. I think you're really going to enjoy a lot of the examples he uses in sports psychology to get guys to kind of see the mental side of the game a different way. So hope you enjoy it. Once again, as always, you can find me at Too Tall Sports Podcast anywhere. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Google, everywhere, Podchaser, iHeartRadio. And of course, YouTube, you can watch the video version of the podcast as well. So once again, please enjoy my interview with Bernie Holliday. Thanks. All right, welcome back to another edition of the Too Tall Sports Podcast. I have a special guest today. He is the director of mental strength for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I worked with him a few years back during my career and time with them, and he's got great insight on the mental side of the game and sports psychology for professional athletes. So I wanted to get Bernie's takes on everything. His name is Bernie Holliday. How you doing, Bernie? Thanks for being on with me today.
Yeah, Brett, it's great to see you again, and it's exciting to see you in this kind of a role now after having known you as a baseball player and pitcher.
Yeah, man, it's different being on the other side. I'm glad that we can explore. I love the mental side of the game, so I definitely wanted to bring you on and give some people the insight because there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, between the ears, as they say, that fans don't know about. So for all my listeners, I think they're going to be happy to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it's like pulling back the curtain, being able to look behind the curtain on Wizard of Oz.
Definitely. I know. It's awesome. It's cool to see that side of the game. So I want to get into your journey, but you've been with the Pirates for 11 years now, or you're going on your 11th season. How has it been like for you over these last 11 years or 10 years?
It's been fantastic. I never thought I'd be in professional baseball for over a decade, so that kind of freaks me out in a good way when I think about it.
Right.
You know how fickle this game can be and how quickly it can change for somebody. And in fact, it just did with a bunch of our minor leaguers. They were released just yesterday, and it was heartbreaking. But so to be in the game for 10 years, it feels like an honor, and I'm very humbled by it. The more I'm around the game, the more I realize I don't know anything about the game or about sports psychology. The longer you do something, the more you realize you don't know it the way you want to know it. So that's been very inspiring and humbling for me to realize there are so many different levels of depth and richness and nuance to the game, both the mental game and more the technical, tactical side. So that's been fascinating for me to see. I also think with this pandemic we're going through, and with the shortening of the minor league system to make it smaller, I'm starting to really appreciate how mental skills can apply to life outside of baseball. So while we talk a lot about between the lines, here are some mental skills, some tools, some techniques you can use to make your game better. I'm getting increasingly fascinated by how you can improve the game of life using the techniques and tools that I have. And in the last couple of years, I've made much more of a push to go that direction.
Definitely. I think, and I've been to therapy, I've been to sports psychology. I think it's great. It can only help. I think it's a good thing. It's an unbiased opinion sometimes, not in your family or someone who knows you. It's good to hear from someone else, other than people that know you. So
somebody that's not too close to the flame.
Yeah, exactly. No, you want to feel comfortable and be able to get a unbiased opinion from somebody. So I definitely can appreciate that. I want to go back to kind of how you started. So kind of just maybe a little background where you're from, how you grew up, and what sports you gravitated towards, obviously before you got into baseball.
Sure. Baseball is not my first language. Probably the language I speak most fluently is tennis. I grew up being a junior tennis player, went to college, played 4 years of collegiate tennis, and then went on to become a tennis teaching pro at different racket clubs and different resorts. So I played and coached tennis. Probably the language I speak almost as fluent as tennis would be volleyball. I played volleyball as an outlet because I took tennis way too serious and would wrap myself around the axle on the court. So I'd use volleyball in the evenings, playing competitively just to sort of unwind and just to do something I enjoyed. And that turned into a 15-year career playing a ton of doubles, some indoor at the various colleges I went to, and I ultimately started coaching volleyball as well. So those are the two sports that I probably have a passion for. Baseball, I've learned to love over the years, but I came into it not really knowing much about the sport, not really knowing much about the nuance of the sport. So that's sort of my background athletically. Academically, I went to Kutztown University as an undergrad, and my degree was in criminal justice. So it wasn't in sports psychology, wasn't in sports science at all. I actually got out of there after 4 years of playing college tennis, and I went to work in prisons, interviewing inmates. And then
Oh,
my job actually shifted to catching shoplifters in stores. I would walk around basically wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and I'd put a t-shirt under my arm or a thing of toilet paper, and I would walk around the store for 8 hours watching people steal things, and I'd have to stop them and show them my badge and basically arrest them for being a shoplifter.
oh
And how I
wow! I
got,
didn't know that.
yeah, it was crazy. That's what led to sports psychology, was that criminal justice job. I guess it was, I had a job offer on the table to be a teaching pro at a resort in the Caribbean. And I was contemplating it, like, it's not in my career. Do I want to do this? It doesn't really make sense for what I went to school for. But at the same time, I didn't really enjoy my criminal justice job of catching shoplifters. And then one day I got into an altercation with an 80-pound drug addict in the parking lot. I got punched in the ear. And I called up my boss that night and said, "Hey, this is you. This is my 2-week notice. I'm going to take the job in the Caribbean teaching tennis." So I went down to Barbuda, which is an island owned by the Antiguan government, and would spend the mornings teaching tennis, would spend the evenings teaching tennis, and then laid on the beach all afternoon when it was too hot, contemplating what I'm going to do with my life. This criminal justice thing's over. I love people. I love sports. I love teaching, but what can I do? So I had my family, my friends send me books down to the islands, and I read about this thing called sports psychology. I had no idea it was a field. I didn't know there was an academic discipline or science called sports psychology. And as I read it, I became fascinated by it and realized that this is what I want to do. It's human behavior coupled with sport, and those were my two passions: was human beings and how they behave, and then competitive sport.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's pretty interesting how you went from criminal justice and the mindset of dealing with that, but you knew once that you had an altercation with that guy that it just wasn't your deal. So that's good you were able to get out of that and find something and have some time to digest it all and where you really want to go.
Yeah, well, every day during my day job, I was just frustrated and discouraged. Then I'd go to teach at racket clubs in the evening, and people came in. They were excited to learn something. They wanted to be fit and healthy. They wanted to challenge themselves with a new sport, and it was night and day difference between how I felt in the evenings and how I felt during my day job. And I knew
Right.
it was time to change.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that. I did see that you went to University of Idaho for your PhD. What was that? What went into that decision on what made you want to go there, and what were you looking for at that point of what you really wanted to pursue?
Yeah, well, as I was laying on the beach and I'm flipping through these different books, it was a tough gig. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But as I'm lying on the beach reading these books, I came across these different sports psychology chapters, these different sports psychology books, and I kept coming across the name Damon Burton. And I'm like, who is this Damon Burton cat? And I really liked what he was doing. I really liked the research that he was cited in. I really liked some of the theories that his name was behind in the books. And I'm like, I got to read about this guy. And I found out he's a professor of sports psychology at the University of Idaho.
Gotcha.
So got on the phone with him. We hit it off through different conversations. Ultimately, I said, hey, I'd like to go here. And I applied. And he said, I'd like you to come here. So I went to Idaho without ever having visited it. Just knew that I liked him. I liked the program. I liked what he was about and the research he was doing. So I flew out there, and I can remember this day very vividly. I landed in Spokane, Washington, and that's about an hour and a half drive south to the University of Idaho. And I got in a rental car with 2 suitcases, and that's all I had. I start driving down the road. I hit the scan button on the radio, and for an hour and a half, it just spun looking for a station. And I thought, oh man, where am I at? But it was a wonderful decade of my life. I don't know, yeah, 7 or 8 years, I guess. Got my master's, my PhD there, and just Damon Burton's a mentor and a friend, and I'm forever grateful that he was in my life and was able to mentor me in my career.
That's
Wonderful
awesome.
individual.
Yeah, that's a great story that you actually got to read about him and you got to work with him too. So that's unusual. Not a lot of people get the chance to do that. So I'm sure that was a cool thing for you.
Hmm.
And I mean, one of the coolest things you did was, I mean, I don't know for you, but it looked like on paper is working with the military and the United States Army. And you spent some years working with them. Did you get to work with athletes or more like the infantry or soldiers, or how did that all work?
Yeah, it's a really cool and weird transition. People used to think that I'm the Army guy working with Army soldiers, but really what I started as was the sport guy working with athletes. And I'll get to sort of the transition, but basically what soldiers wanted at that time, about the time the two wars were going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, is they wanted to be trained like tactical athletes. That was the phrase that the Army was using, is they should train their soldiers like tactical athletes. And whatever Olympians are getting, they wanted their soldiers to get those as well. whether it's sports science, nutrition, biomechanics, sports psychology. If the Olympians were getting it, they wanted the soldiers to get it. So they started reaching out to people like us who were in the sports science and sports psych field saying, hey, can you come teach my soldiers what you're teaching the athletes? But how it all started was when I went to West Point in 2004, 9/11 happened. All of these kids coming to West Point now know that in 4 years they're going to graduate and go to war. So it was a very inspiring time to be around them because they came in knowing that they're going to combat right after they graduate.
Right.
So for 4 years, I did sports psychology with the cadet athletes, helping them athletically, helping them academically, and helping them militarily prepare for that 4-year experience. And I'd work with men's tennis, women's tennis, men's volleyball, women's volleyball, soccer. And after 4 years, they started to graduate. They'd go over to war or they'd become a company commander. And as a captain, they'd be leading 90 or 100 troops. And they started reaching back to us, the people that were doing what I was doing. It was called performance enhancement instructor. They'd reach back to the performance enhancement team and say, hey, the stuff that you taught my team when I was a tennis captain, can you come out and teach my unit that? Because we're about to deploy in 6 months, and I think it would really help my soldiers. And we got more and more of those calls from different athletic team captains who are now leading soldiers saying, hey, the stuff that you taught my team was invaluable. I want you to come out and teach my unit that because we're going overseas real soon. We're going to be in combat real soon. Can you come out and help us? So we started doing that to the point where it became unsustainable. We were in West Point working with the athletes every week. Every weekend we were on the road at different Army installations until finally the chief of staff of the Army, who's basically the boss of the entire Army, usually like a 3-star general, he came to West Point and said, hey, I love what you're doing, but you can't do it the way you're doing it. You're getting spread too thin. How much is it going to take to open up a couple of these around the Army? And we had no idea. So we're like, I don't know, $10 million. So he wrote us a check and said, open these things up.
Whoa.
And that's when the little Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point became the Army Center for Enhanced Performance. Now we opened up a lot of these small little sets all around the Army, staffed them up with sports psychology people. And my job then was to train them to be able to teach sports psychology to tactical officers and tactical infantry. And that's kind of how it went from sport to big Army. And then that kind of spun ultimately into how I got to the Pirates.
So when you're there, what's the mindset of, people in the military, and how do you put sports psychology into their world?
Yeah, it's on one hand, it's very different because, as you know, in this game, we're playing for trophies and rings. And in that world, they're playing for keeps. I mean, a soldier doesn't have the luxury of losing.
Right.
So there's a level of severity that was way different. But at the same time, you look at the human nervous system. The human nervous system is the human nervous system. No matter what scenario you're put in, the mind is the mind, the brain is the brain, and the body is the body. So what we've learned going from sport to the Army at West Point when we made that transition was that high performance is high performance. And this field's starting to branch into military, it's starting to branch into SWAT, first responders like firefighters, EMT. It's even going into places like surgery and medical school, helping them prepare for their careers. So basically what we realized is this idea of performance psychology is helpful anywhere that there's high stakes, high performance is needed, you needed to be at your best, and the outcome was uncertain. And that's really where these high performance psychology skills came into play. So that was the common ground, I think, even though it was very different. The common ground was high performance is high performance. And when the outcome matters, the outcome's unknown, and there's high stakes, we want to be at our best. And I think that's where the soldiers really embraced it. And what was interesting was the soldiers that embraced it the most were the highest level soldiers, the ones who'd seen the most combat, or the special operators who knew that the stakes were so severe. The ones that were a little bit more resistant were the ones that were new to the Army and didn't really understand what they were about to face.
I think one thing that I saw you said in an article was that a lot of coaches love Army books and like reading, and then a lot of people in the Army love sports books. So there is kind of that crossover, especially the older generation. They love that mentality of the other thing. So I think I saw you said that somewhere.
Yeah, I think we've all heard athletes talk about wanting to be a warrior on the field.
So in the trenches,
actual warrior in the trenches, on the battlefield. So I think they respect the Army, they respect combat, they respect the military and how challenging that is. And at the same time, it's funny to look at, you go into a company commander's office, you look at his bookshelf or her bookshelf, and you'll see books from great coaches like Lou Holtz and Vince Lombardi. And you realize that both groups, both leadership tends to want to borrow and be inspired by the other group. So there is that overlap, and there's that sort of cross-pollination between military settings and sports settings.
Yeah. And I think even one of the simplest things that you had told us as a group or just in general, it's like when you're playing sports, you're not saving lives. It's not do or die really. It's sports, So I think it's easy to get caught up in that when you're in it. But if you really take a step back, now you were with the military and you've seen sports now, mentally as an athlete, you got to take that into consideration. Hey, it's nothing crazy. Don't try to overdo it. You're not in the military basically.
It does bring a different level of perspective to what you do. And, I've heard our coaches and our players joke around all the time that they get to put on a uniform and run around and act like a kid for a job. And in that regard, it really does kind of take the idea of threat and turn it into opportunity. Because I think whenever we face something where it matters and it's unknown how it's going to go, you can go one of two routes. You can see the threat in it, or you can see the opportunity in it. And I think what you're talking about and what the Army taught me and what I try to teach the athletes is that there's a lot of opportunities that we can grasp in these situations if we could just have that mindset to look at it as an opportunity and to keep it in perspective. I think that's what helps people shift from the threat perspective to that more opportunity perspective.
Right. Now, for your career, what made you want to or have the idea to move on to baseball or sports in general from the Army or from the military at West Point? What was the big determining factor of you shifting careers?
I wanted to do the work the right way. And, the Army job was very humbling and inspiring because I never ever considered serving. It's something that never crossed my mind as a kid. I know I was going to go to college. I was going to get a degree. I was going to play tennis in college, and I was going to get a job after. And that was just sort of the plan for me. The Army wasn't even on my mind. So looking at the two wars, somehow feeling like I wish I could have given back somehow, this gave me my opportunity to kind of give back in my little niche way that I could kind of offer back to these people doing very challenging jobs, something that I'm passionate about that I think I have a skill set for. So on that regard, it was super rewarding to be a part of the Army. The challenge came when it came to scaling. At that time, there were about 30 of us, and there was an active Army of about 700,000 active duty soldiers. And you just couldn't scale that way. So you were basically asked to do the best bad job possible. Because having 30 people service 700,000, you're going to do a bad job. You're just not going to be able to be as in-depth as you want.
Right.
So we had to do just the best bad job we could. And we will often see units just once, and then they deploy. And I wanted something that was going to be more long-standing, more meaningful, where there's an ongoing building relationship, where we can do the skill building work, create a foundation, and then build off of that foundation. I've had a mentor refer to what we did in the Army as seagull consulting. And if you think about what a seagull does, it swoops down, it makes a lot of noise, it poops, and it flies away. And I felt like that's what we were asked to do in the Army, was we go in, swoop down, talk to a unit, make a lot of noise, poop, and then fly away. We never see the unit again. And when I talked to Kyle Stark, Kyle's the one who brought me in. He was the farm director at the time of the Pirates.
Yeah.
He wanted to know what were soldiers doing to become more mentally tough? What were Navy SEALs doing to become more mentally tough? So he went out to the different various branches of the military to find out how they're being trained mentally. And he came across my program at the Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point and said, you know what, I love what you guys are doing. I'm in. I don't need to know how to do it. Just give me a name. I'd love to be able to have somebody come in and build this at the Pirates. And they said, well, Bernie be the best guy for this, but he's not interested. He's not going to leave. But you're more than welcome to talk to him, and maybe he'll have some ideas on who to bring in or give you some names. And Kyle said, would you mind if I talk to him? So we got on the phone for about 3 hours, and about halfway through that phone conversation, it turned into a job interview without me realizing it. And a few days later, Kyle called back and said, hey, do you want to be a Pirate? And I was able to do the job the right way. I'd come in, it was a smaller number of athletes, smaller number of coaches over multiple years, being able to build and sustain a relationship together. And for me, that was very appealing, to be able to do the job the right way with people that wanted me there and really wanted to invest in this.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'm glad you got that opportunity to do that. So, and I'm glad I got to meet you once you came over to the Pirates back in 2010. So I got to learn all this cool stuff. And
is that when you were drafted, 2010?
No, I was drafted 2008, and then I got traded to the Pirates at the trade deadline in 2009. So that summer, and then you came in, I think, the following year. So
okay, so you're there for a year, but you were in baseball for 2 years at that point.
Right.
Okay.
And one of my favorite sayings that you had brought over, and you've used this many times, is, quote unquote, embrace the suck, which, coming from your military background, you brought that over to us. Can you explain kind of what that means?
Sure. Embrace the suck is a term that we borrowed from the Army. It's very popular in military circles. And I like the edginess of it. One of the things I wanted to bring into the Pirates in 2010 was a little bit of a mental edge to kind of create a little bit of a grit behind when we thought of the mental game. It can often be seen as something that you do behind closed doors, something that you do when you're struggling. I want to create more of a training mentality of this is how you get tough, and you need to build and develop toughness. So I thought Embrace the Suck really kind of got to that piece of having some edge. And a lot of people loved it, and a few people it really rubbed the wrong way because there was edge to it and the word suck was in there. But what it really means is I see it in two ways. The first is we're going to persevere. We're going to persist, and we're going to persevere and persist better than you. So if I need to go into a hard environment against an opponent, I'm going to be able to persevere better and longer than they will. So it's having that pride in our ability to go through hard, our pride in the ability to go through tough. So that's the first part, is the perseverance piece. And the second piece is the growth piece. That not only do we want to embrace the suck, but I actually want people to seek out the suck. And when you think about training, you think about development, you think about getting better at anything, how do you get better? You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to seek out difficult training environments, push yourself beyond what you're comfortable doing, the suck basically. And that's how your body adapts and grows. So not only do we want to embrace it when it's thrust upon us, like you're in that 35-degree game in April and it's snowing sideways, that's the suck that we need to persevere through, but it's also putting yourself in tough learning environments, putting yourself out of your comfort zone so that you can fail, fall on your face, get up, learn something, and get better. So there's the perseverance piece, but there's also the growth piece. And those are sort of the two aspects that really kind of capture what Embrace the Suck's all about.
I love it. I think everybody, like you were saying in the beginning, everybody can use sports psychology or any type of mental help and cues like that, where everyone's going to go through adversity. How do you come out of it, basically? Mm-hmm. As far as I'm sure you've noticed in the last 10 years in baseball, everyone has rituals and routines and superstitions. How do you kind of, like, if some guys aren't able to do them because the bus, breaks down or whatever, how do you help guys with their superstitions and routines and rituals, and what's the difference from those?
Yeah, routines are huge in baseball, and I'm a huge advocate for routines. My mentor, Doc Nate Zinser at West Point, really gave a very clear and succinct description between the difference between the two. And he said routines are things that you control to set up your day to be ready at 7 o'clock to compete. So you control the routines, but the rituals control you. So if you're doing something because you're afraid that if you don't do it, you're going to fail that night, then you're being controlled by the ritual. I think about that old example about the high school athlete who's got the lucky underwear, and mom sees it and is like, this is disgusting, and she throws it out, and now he freaks out because he's not going to be able to compete in the game that night because the lucky underwear is thrown away. That's when the ritual controls you. Right. So a routine is something, and I use the phrase ETA. I think the ETA, that is your mental game raw material. Your energy and emotions is the E. Your thoughts are the T, the things that you say to yourself and the things you picture in your head. And then A is attention. Where are you focusing your attention? And what a routine does, it really aligns your energy and emotions, it aligns your thoughts, and it aligns your attention so that you can be at your best at 7 o'clock when you want to be. And people that have really good routines, what it does is it aligns those ETAs in a place that gets them physically, mentally where they want to be. So I remember a story, and I've shared this before, about a football player who he had to find a penny in the stadium somewhere on game day. And that was his ritual. And on some days he found one pretty quick. It might take 15, 20 minutes, and he'd find a penny and he'd go about his day and he'd be fine. Other days he might be out there for 2.5, 3 hours, crawling on his hands and knees underneath the stadium bleachers looking for a penny, come in time for the 1 o'clock game, and he's sweaty, he hasn't eaten, he's exhausted, knees are scratched up, and never really was able to get himself into the game. So that really kind of highlights the difference between routines that you control to align your ETA to where you want it versus a ritual that controls you.
That's crazy. Yeah, what a story. It's amazing what guys will do. And hey, I was definitely, I had to have certain shirts I wore on certain days, like it just, there's things. But I definitely appreciate that side of it too.
Yeah. And if it's something that you can control, then I'm okay with a ritual. If it's something you can guarantee you can do every time, some kind of a ritual you do on the mound or in the box or on deck, and it's something that you can guarantee will be there from stadium to stadium and from series to series, go for it. I'm fine with that. That doesn't hurt. But it's when you have a ritual that's tied to something that may not always be consistent. That's when things can get dangerous, because when it lacks in that environment, then you freak out.
Right. Exactly. One of my other favorite stories, or at least segments that you showed us back in the day, was the famous, there's a Bill Buckner interview. and he was interviewed. I think it before the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he basically, one of the reporters asked him, "Oh, hey, are you worried about the Mets, or are you nervous at all, or is anything, bothering you?" And he said, "No, I think we'll be fine, unless the ball goes through my legs or something like that." Well, lo and behold, it happened, and the Red Sox ended up losing the World Series to the Mets in 1986, and Buckner was crucified forever. Why did you want to show us that, and what should be the lesson from seeing that, the way he was talking about the foreshadowing, basically?
Yeah, it's a very freaky and scary video to watch as he gives that interview before that game. And when you ask anybody that's a baseball fan, do you remember the Bill Buckner incident? Almost everybody would say absolutely. It was in the ninth inning when the ball went through his legs and the run scored. It was a five hopper down the first base line.
Right.
And all he had to do was basically bend down, pick up the ball, and take one step to his left and touch the bag, and they won. And that ball goes through his legs. So everybody knows that story. But what they very rarely ever talk about is this interview that he gives to a local newspaper reporter right before that game. And he said two things in that report, that interview. He said, the dreams are that you have a good series and win. And the nightmares are that you let the game-winning run score on the ground ball through your legs. And as I thought about that, and as I thought over the years, what did he think about more? I kind of landed on the fact that I think he thought about the nightmare more than the dream, just because of the level of vividness. The dream was not very vivid; it was very sterile. The dreams are you have a great series and win. But then when you look at how vivid and how rich the nightmare was, the nightmare is that you let the game-winning run score on a ground ball through your legs. There was so much more detail there when he talked about that piece of it that I got to think that was on his mind a little bit more than the dream. Was I don't want to be the person that screws it up for my team. I don't want to be the person to make a critical error at a costly time in the game, and I don't want to basically fail out there and screw things up. And just because of how vivid that was, I kind of have to think that was on his mind a little bit more than going out there and having a good series. So I use it to really highlight one of the golden rules of the mental game, that you get more of what you think about. And our thoughts will always impact our emotions, which always impacts our physiology, which ultimately impacts our performance. And we can be purposeful and deliberate with what we think and get that chain of events going in a good way, or we could be haphazard or spontaneous with how we let our thoughts go, and that'll get the ball rolling in an opposite direction. And Bill Buckner is obviously an example of kind of getting that ball rolling in a more haphazard way. He wasn't very disciplined with what he allowed himself to think about. He allowed his mind to race with him before that, and he got more of what he thought about. He thought about that ball going through his legs, and I can only imagine when that ball came off the bat and he starts to see three hops in front of him, he thinks, oh man, don't mess this up. Don't screw this up. And what happens is you get more of what you think about. So that's sort of the takeaway with the Bill Buckner story. I guess in a more scientific way, we talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy, that we create our own reality based on the thoughts and the intentions we have going into it. If we think something's going to suck and we have that mentality, this is going to be terrible, ultimately we create that reality because going in with that mindset, we see things and notice things and experience things differently, and ultimately end up proving ourselves right, that did suck. And on the other side of the coin, we can get that going in a very purposeful, deliberate way and create a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. A great story that I could share with you about a positive self-fulfilling prophecy happened just yesterday.
Okay, sure.
Cole Tucker, who's a shortstop in our system, he's up at the big league level now. Yesterday, Cole's brother, Carson, was just drafted. And Carson went in the first round. And Cole was really excited. I was looking at some of his tweets, and he tweeted something out later in the evening that showed him and Carson taking batting practice late at night in 2013. And he basically said under that picture, "That a boy, this is why you're going to go in the first round, son." And he then tweeted back out last night, something along the lines of, "See, I knew it all along." But it really highlights how that intention was built between him and his brother back in 2013. And if that's what you're thinking about is, hey, I'm going to be a first round draft, I'm going to be a first round draft, and that's the intention you have going into every single day, it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy, and ultimately you end up creating that reality. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens more often than not.
Sure. I think, yeah, definitely. If you create something before it happens, like you said, you're going to try to prove yourself right. Like, see, I told you I wouldn't do it. So it's very easy to mentally just be negative and live in that world. But I think if you can create the positive mentality, you'll do more to achieve that.
Yeah, there's two phrases I learned from Karen Rivich at University of Penn. The first phrase she talked about was the Teflon effect. And the other one is the Velcro effect. That when we have a certain intention going into a situation, whether that's a baseball game, a job interview, going in to take a final exam in college, we have a certain expectation about how it's going to go. good or bad. And then we look for things in our environment to confirm that intention or to confirm that expectation. And she calls that the Velcro effect, that these things can tend to stick to us. And we start gathering all of this evidence to prove ourselves right, because human beings love to be right. So all these things stick to us. And then the Teflon effect is anything that is contrary to our expectation, we tend to not notice it, or we tend to forget it quickly. And it just slides right off, just like Teflon. So the things that confirm our expectations stick, and the things that deny or refute our expectations slide off. And that's ultimately why we end up proving ourselves right. And we have that self-fulfilling prophecy created. So with our ball players, I always want them to be very deliberate in their routines. What do you want to say to yourself? What do you want to picture? What do you know that your thoughts and your attention needs to be at to put you in a good place? And let's be more deliberate in replicating that.
Yeah, 100%. As far as, let's see what I want to get to. Do you, by the way, do you still use the Bill Buckner thing?
Oh yeah,
you do?
It's one of my openers.
Okay.
Bill Buckner compared to Kirk Gibson.
Oh.
Because Gibson is very deliberate in the dugout before that big at bat in the World Series, where he talks about how he sets his mind up. He visualizes a nice, easy swing. He is excited about the opportunity that he gets to be able to hopefully drive in the run and win the game. And a lot of talking to yourself, telling yourself that you love these situations. He said he refused to think about how much he was hurting his knees and his stomach. But he was very much the opposite of Bill Buckner, where Bill Buckner was kind of haphazard. Kirk Gibson, when he took that big at bat, hit that big home run in the World Series, was very purposeful and deliberate in how he set his mind up before taking the at bat. So I use those two as a contrast as one of my very first talks with the new players.
So now that you've been in baseball for the last 10 years or so, what are some of the biggest issues you see with guys, whether it's, pressing, or they care too much about what the coaches think or the organization thinks of them? What are the main issues that you see from minor league players that come to you with mental issues, or I guess mental tough episodes they've had?
Yeah. So basically, what do they end up tripping over when it comes to their mental game?
Yeah.
And a couple of things that really jump out at me that I think might be unique to baseball. The first, and I love this about baseball, it doesn't apply to you guys as pitchers, maybe to a bullpen guy a little bit more, but definitely the everyday position players, is that every single day your approach and your process is threatened with results. And you go 0 for 4 that night, and you start to second guess what you're doing. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe what me and my coach are working on together is the wrong idea. Maybe I need to change something. And then you've got about 18 or 19 hours to be able to recommit to a process before it's threatened again the next night. And I start to see these guys like to change lanes so much because every night the process is threatened. And if you go 0 for 12 in a series, something's definitely wrong. We have to overhaul the entire swing, throw it all out, rebuild something from the ground up. And then if you go 0 for 4 again, oh my goodness, now it's, I need to rethink this process. So it's really getting a guy to commit to something for an extended period of time and to believe in it long-term if the results are showing up short-term. Because I think about football, and while it's a mentally draining sport in a different way, I think the violence, the intensity, when it comes to process and commitment, they need to be able to commit on Saturday or on Sunday. And they've got 6 days to be able to get back to recommitting to a process. So they've got 6 days to rebuild. Baseball player doesn't have 6 days to rebuild. He's got 1 day.
Right.
So that's a huge challenge to me that I love. And I think guys who can commit to something for an extended period of time, even if they're not getting the results early on, I think they're the ones that tend to progress the most long term. I'd probably say the second thing is owning your own game and owning your own skill set. I've heard so many guys use the phrase, I'm trying to work on KY's swing. KY is our hitting coordinator. Or I'm really trying to perfect Mitch's delivery. Mitch is our pitching coordinator. So it's not their delivery, it's Mitch's delivery they're trying to figure out. It's not their swing, it's KY's swing they're trying to work on in the cage. And I found that guys take that turn in their careers. They kind of turn the corner when they're able to stop trying to do somebody else's swing and they know what their swing is. Or when they stop trying to reproduce their coach's delivery that their coach wants and they know this is my delivery, this is why I do it the way I do it, and I've got conviction in it. And it's when they create, I guess you would call it a professional filter. Because as a minor league player, you could have 30 or 40 coaches touch you during your minor league experience.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of stuff to filter in. So that professional filter allows you to take what you need, own it as yours, and then discard the rest. And I think early on when we see guys first drafted, we see guys in short season, they don't have a filter. They try to take in everything. They try to do it all. They get confused and they lose themselves in the process. So I think in baseball, what we see is those guys that have that filter and can own what they're doing and see it as theirs, not something they're trying to do for their coaches. Those are the guys that make the biggest progress over the longest period of time. Probably the big league level, the one thing I see the most is not on the field, but it's more a lack of creating boundaries off the field. At that level, everybody wants something. Guys want tickets, guys want cards sold or signed, guys want spikes or gloves, give me your bat. Can you get me to a game? Can you do an interview? Can you do a podcast? They're getting pulled in many different directions, and they didn't experience that in the minor leagues to the same extent. And I think about some of our nice guys who'd like to be people pleasers. They end up doing so many things for other people at the big league level that they lose their own routine, and they sacrifice their own needs in getting ready. And before you know it, they're exhausted, they're getting pulled in many different directions, and they feel unprepared and confused and overwhelmed. So at the big league level, it's more helping them with the mental skills off the field to create those boundaries and to take care of themselves so that when they get on the field, they're pure and they're clear. There's not a lot of extra noise or garbage that they're bringing in from off the field.
I love that. I think it totally makes sense. The higher you go, there's different expectations, there's different needs. And I think as you become more of a pro, you got more years in mentally, you're able to handle more. You've seen more. So I totally get that. Finally, I wanted to ask you, do you have any, mental health or sports psychology books or anything that you could recommend that you think would be beneficial for everybody to read or listen to?
Yeah, I have a couple go-tos that I think are really valuable for anybody in any performance endeavor, whether it's sport or a professional career. I think if you're trying to perform at a high level consistently, any of these resources would be really beneficial to you. The first is a book that I've had many, many athletes and coaches recommend to me. And when they're doing that, when they're saying, hey, Bernie, you got to read this book, I know it's going to be a good one. And it's called Golf's Sacred Journey. It's by, I believe his name is Cook. And he's worked a lot with PGA professionals, PGA Tour players, PGA champions. And what David Cook does in this book is he kind of snowballs all of his experiences with PGA players into one fictitious character who's trying to get his cue card and get onto the tour.
Okay.
And he has this meltdown on like the 13th hole of a qualifier tournament, shoots like an 11, and he's out of contention. And ultimately, as he's driving back home, he runs across this broken down driving range on this ranch, and he just pulls out a bunch of balls and a golf club and just starts hitting balls out of frustration. And the rancher comes up and says, hey, this is my course. You give me 7 days, I'll change your game. And they strike off this friendship. And the book has basically 7 chapters. Each chapter is a day on the ranch where they go through a different lesson. And these lessons are life lessons, but they're also peak performance lessons. They're talking about golf, but as you read it, you're going to relate it to anything. So that would be my first go-to is Golf Sacred Journeys, 7 Days in Utopia is the name of the book.
Okay.
Well, the second one would be anything from Bob Rotella. Bob Rotella is a mentor of my mentor. So he's kind of in my, I guess you would call it my sports psychology family tree at the top.
Okay.
And he's done a couple books again in golf. Golf is his thing. And one of them is called Golf's Not a Game of Perfect. Another one is called Golf is a Game of Confidence. But he basically tells stories about the PGA players and champions he's worked with in bite-sized chunks, 3 or 4 page chapters. And it's always like, what did I learn from Nicholas? What did I learn from Woods? And it's a little story that has a little mental game lesson built into the story. So it's a really engaging book. If you're a golfer, you'd love it. If you're not a golfer, you're going to be able to make the connections. And I guess the other 2 resources are more watch or listen. There's a tremendous website he's got a podcast. He's done some great videos. His name is Trevor Reagan. And the website's called trainugly.com. And I think he's branched into something called thelearnerlab.com. But he does some fantastic stuff. Very relatable guy. Speaks very simply about some very complicated concepts. And it's all about learning, motor learning, growth mindset, and peak performance. The last one that's a go-to for me, I've got some friends who run a podcast called Coach Your Brains Out. A guy named John Mayer and Billy. And the 2 of these guys together have put together this podcast where they're both volleyball players. Billy Allen's a current AVP player. John Mayer's coaching him was a former AVP player. And they started out in volleyball, talking to volleyball coaches about volleyball coaching, but it's really broadened out into all things coaching and even a lot of things athletic excellence. So it's even relevant for athletes. But they have a great podcast with some great guests. So I'd strongly recommend you check out Coach Your Brains Out. So Those are my go-tos that I recommend for most people.
No, that's awesome. I'm definitely going to check them out. That's great. I think everybody will definitely get something from those. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you for all the knowledge. It was awesome. Definitely one of my best episodes I've done, just because, I love the information. So thank you very much for coming on today, and we'll have to do it again soon.
I'd love to do it again. Thank you.
Thanks, man.